We're going to transition right away into the last segment of our presentation, which we're calling the network discussion. And joining this panel is going to be our steering committee from Voters Choice Los Angeles. You heard this project mentioned earlier, and I just wanted to share a bit about who we are and what we're doing. So as was shared, Future of California Elections is a cross-sector model. We launched Voters Choice California in 2017, focused on supporting communities transitioning to the Voters Choice Act. And then in 2019, just last year, we started a local network called the Voters Choice Los Angeles Network, which Registrar Dean Logan mentioned. And so joining us right now, we have, sorry, just catching myself up. We have Brittany Stonesifer, voting rights attorney with ACLU. We have Ellie Flores, the California Director of Civic Engagement with NALEO Educational Fund. And you guys can just wave hi. This is like the informal part of the program. We have James Woodson, Senior Policy Manager with California Calls. Kiana Asmanfar, Policy Manager for California Calls. And we of course have Mindy Romero back with USC California Civic Engagement Project. And then the way this is going to work is we're going to continue the Q&A conversation. We did get a lot more questions coming in, so please keep on dropping them in the chat. And I want to thank Harley Ham, Director of Program and Events with USC Price School, who's going to help facilitate that Q&A and she'll read them out, and then the panel will continue answering those questions. So that's kind of the format. Please go ahead and pose your questions or comments. We'll have the panel react to it. What concerns do you have? How do you feel about the election? What challenges do you still want addressed that we haven't covered today? I know there's still a lot of questions out there. So with that, do we have any questions coming in, Harley?
I do. So the first question is, what % turnout would be acceptable, and how does that compare to districts that have good voting percentage?
An open question for those that are doing this work. How do you measure what's good? How do you measure success for your organizations? Maybe we can hear from Ellie, who's just joining us, and then from James Woodson.
Hi, everyone. And I'm glad to see all the familiar faces and everyone who is listening. So, so I don't have, I think, a specific answer to you on what I think we think the percentage of Latino, for us, right, at NALEO, specifically Latino voters, right? What would be the percentage? What would be success for us? I think one of the things that we're focusing as an organization right now is to really look at, making sure that Latinos that want to vote understand all of the options that exist to vote, right? I think we're hearing a lot about vote by mail, right? And I think that for us, we understand that there is going to be a large amount of Latinos that are still going to want to vote in person, right? And so for us, as part of this work is to figure out how to educate those Latinos, how to get that information to them, right? And I think for us in measuring success, right, is are we able to get that information to them? Are we able to educate them? And ultimately, are we able to make sure that they get out to vote, right? And so for us, it's also going to be key on the messaging. I think for, everything is sort of around COVID. And I know right now, as we've been working on the census work as well, a lot of things are surrounding COVID, right? And although we do have to speak to the concerns that Latinos may have around, let's say, safety, right, and around COVID, that should probably not be at the core of our messaging. Similar to census, right? On the census front, Latinos were very concerned about confidentiality, right? And so we address confidentiality, but then we make sure that we talked about the issues and the things that Latinos care about, right? In terms of the programs, in terms of the benefits. So I think in terms of the elections, for us, it's going to be similar. We will speak to sort of the safety aspects, and we will speak to that. But I think we do have to keep in mind what research says about what Latinos truly care about when it comes to election work. And that still is, right, education, that still is health, immigration, and jobs. So at the core of our messaging, I think we'll be talking about that. And so I think for us, we'll continue to work on that with all the agencies here today and sort of figuring out what are the key messages and to making sure that Latinos that still want to vote right in person are able to have access to vote in person. And particularly those folks that do want to vote in person, many times it's due to a language accessibility factor, right? They would like some sort of assistance in language. So I think for us, we'll be looking at that. We'll be hopefully working with all the agencies here on ensuring that Latinos get all the information and education on the options available to them to get out and vote.
Great, and thanks, Ellie. And I want to go back to that messaging in a bit, but I want to give James a chance to answer. How do you measure success for your network? What's the right number of, yes, we succeeded in turnout?
Yes, I think there's a lot of things that go into determining what turnout's going to look like in any election. I think it's important to, make sure you're doing apples to apples comparisons, right? So one of the ways that you could do that is to look at, 2016 turnout, 2012 turnout. We know at least in 2016, actually, one of the strategies of one of the candidates was to actually drive down turnout, right? So 2016 actually saw a lower turnout than we normally would in a presidential election. I think, folks generally think that this year is going to be, fairly large turnout. I think the COVID pandemic, obviously throws a wrench in that, right? We don't know how folks will respond. But, I'll use Community Coalition as an example because they are part of the California Cause Network. And, one of the things that we might do for their work, right, is to look at the Black and Latino voters that they talk to in South LA and compare that to Black and Latino turnout overall, right, in South LA. And really look at, did they have, an increase in turnout compared to, the folks that they spoke to compared to just overall. We might look at, how Black and Latino voters turned out in the county to really kind of measure, how effective our conversations were. And so, yeah, again, there's ways that we can kind of tell, and I think it's probably early at this point to tell what overall turnout will look like for November. But I think as we get closer, folks will start to narrow down on that.
Great, thanks. And Harley, do we have other questions?
I do. I have another one. Is civic duty a sufficient motivator to get people to vote? What else sparks people to action?
Yeah, great. Thank you for that question. And Wilma, thank you for joining us. I got a text that you're heading out, but we appreciate you coming and spending time with us today.
Thank you for having me. Have a great day.
So that question around is civic duty, right? That's really, when we think about messaging, that's often a message that we lead with. Ellie just shared that they're going to take a strategy to continue focusing on messaging that speaks to the priorities of Latino voters. What are strategies for messaging that your organizations are thinking about? And Kirk, I'd love to hear from you on this point as well, since you talked about doing a lot of voter contact in your work.
Thank you. I got to take a quote from the great Congressmember Karen Bass. I learned this back in 2015. I've been carrying it with me. This has kind of been my mantra ever since. Nothing activates people to action more than frustration. Or another way of putting it is nothing gets rid of the frustration than taking action. Nothing gets rid of it like taking action. So a lot of our folks, we have all these concerns, whether it be police brutality or healthcare, and we want to feel like we're doing something about it. So when you give folks a pathway of action so you can actually see the real-time results, so they can feel like they contributed to the victory, that's where you get the lifelong organizers. This is where you get the lifelong grassroots leaders. This is where you get the folks that are going to go, and when they're in the barbershop or when they're at the grocery store, they're going to be talking about the election. So it's making it real to them, identifying their self-interest, and then giving them a pathway to activation.
Yeah, absolutely. That's powerful. That gave me chills. That's a great quote to be inspired by. Harley, if you can keep on going through the question that we have left.
Sure. Next question is, I love the diversity of this panel, but was wondering if anyone can speak to the outreach to the AAPI community.
Yeah, and a lot of the organizations here are network organizations. So I wanted to go ahead and put that out there. I know that we all work in collaboration across the diversity of Los Angeles County. So could somebody speak to us about outreach and how the Asian American Pacific Islander community is approaching voter education and outreach within your networks.
This is Brittany from ACLU. I can just share that one of the partners that we have in Future of California Elections is Asian Americans Advancing Justice, which is an amazing organization and really leads both a lot of research and a lot of civic engagement and policy work, specifically targeting the Asian American Pacific Islander community. And historically what they've done is a lot of both outreach and poll monitoring during elections. And I know, of course, those efforts might have to change during a COVID environment, but they are an amazing organization and encourage people to check them out.
Thanks, Brittany. And we don't have any other questions coming in. So if you guys have additional ones you have not answered or you are thinking about out in the audience, please go ahead and post them. I had questions around that, right? So part of the Voters Choice Los Angeles Network is building a representative network within LA County. We have the South Asian Network as well, who's partnered with us. And everybody's thinking about how do we transition our traditional in-person outreach, which we have seen and data has showed is the most successful, into now a virtual or meeting people in social media spaces. And Kiana, I want to direct this one to you. California Call has done a lot of digital strategy and organizing, most recently around the mock election that LA County hosted. Can you share with us some learnings that you guys had there as people are transitioning perhaps in a new way of outreach? What should people keep in mind for digital organizing? And then I'll let others answer that question after that as well.
Yeah, so I think, and some of the earlier panelists mentioned this, but I think starting with positive messaging. I know, around this COVID crisis, there's a lot of stress and anxiety. And while we want to make sure that voting centers are safe and that should be more of a sub message rather than the leading message. So what we did in the mock election was we really led with what was on the ballot and encouraging people to participate. I'm sure some of you probably remember, but we had, what is LA County's best beach? What is LA County's worst freeway on the ballot in the mock election? And I think using that kind of messaging that gets people excited will be really, really important. I also think, in addition to the civic duty, there are different messages that speak to different communities. Civic duty could speak to some individuals, but I think also given the situation that we're in, voting is really an opportunity for people to take control and take power and shape their future by voting and making decisions that are on the ballot. So I think, using that message of empowerment will be really, really important in this upcoming election. I also think that we're in a little bit of a unique situation because not only are we having a bit of a temporary shift in response to coronavirus, we also are still in the middle of educating LA County voters about the changes that were made with the VSAT program. So not only do we have to continue educating people about countywide voting, the availability of same-day registration, their ability to use an accessible ballot marking device to cast their vote in 13 plus languages. We're gonna have to continue doing that work and educating voters about those changes while also clarifying what might be different this fall in LA County. So that's something that I think we should be aware of and have further discussions about.
Great, thanks, Kiana. And others that want to jump in and provide tips on digital organizing for organizations that may be doing this as a new strategy?
Yeah, one tip that we do have is creating toolkits in your digital organizing for your members to share, making it easy for them with the kind of step-by-step of how to do, whether it's a post or sharing to like an Instagram story. Doing toolkits and just sharing that out with your membership base is always effective.
Yeah, and if I can share, I think some of the things that we've learned through the work that we're doing now and in the past, right, is the strategies that in order to reach Latinos, and especially now, we'll have to sort of include reaching folks digitally, right? And so for us, when we're talking about Latinos, the Latinos that we want to reach, we have to also recognize where they are, right, in the digital space. So Twitter for us is not the space where the Latinos we are trying to reach for the elections are, right? Most likely those Latinos would be over on Facebook or they'll be on Instagram, right? To some extent, TikTok, right? We've been seeing more and more organizations use TikTok as a way to reach folks. So I think that's a interesting sort of like new strategy to making outreaching fun, right? And interactive as well. So I think we have to keep in mind those strategies for this election, right? I think continuing of the production of in-language sort of material and in-language like Facebook Lives and stuff of that nature, right? I think we have to make sure that also any of those sort of hotlines that exist that are there to support voters. So like certainly at NALEO, we have our 877 Ve Vota hotline. I think also you have Chirla that has a hotline as well. So I think, you know, these hotlines need to be shared widely so that there is another layer of support that exists for those voters, right, that want information and want support in making sure that they can go out and vote, or if they need support in actually mailing in their ballot, right, that you have those places. And then lastly, I will share that the traditional sort of media segments, particularly for the Spanish sort of media, are still very effective. So you're talking about like your Univision segments, your Telemundo segments, even your radio segments, right? For the census work, faith-based local radio was really effective with talking, or has been effective with talking about the census, and continues to be effective to this day. So I think you have to really use all of those strategies to make sure that you can reach, in our case, that we can reach the Latino population to ensure that they get the information, education, and that ultimately they go out and actually cast a ballot.
Great, thank you. We have about 8 minutes left. I had a question for Brittany, representing the ACLU. Voting rights are incredibly important. Kiana just talked about, you know, the various opportunities that people have to make sure that they can vote, from same-day registration to voters that are formerly incarcerated who may be new. So voting is changing yet again. What are the resources, what are the tools that voters can use to know their rights? How can organizations get access to those tools? I know that you all do some great work around this.
Sure. So the Secretary of State's website is a good place to get reliable information about what is going to be happening statewide. Dean Logan's website, but also California, or ACLU of California, and then our different affiliates are going to be doing outreach this November. So we do a voter pledge program, and to go back to how you can organize in a digital environment. Really, it's a matter of taking a lot of the resources that we already used in a pre-COVID environment and adapting those to this new format. So voter pledge program is a great example. So getting a voter to promise to vote. And then there's a great organization using a strategy called vote tripling. So just very simply get your supporters to promise to turn out 3 additional people to vote with them. And that doesn't have to be in person. It can be in person, but it can also be done if you're all voting by mail. You can text a friend and remind them, hey, have you turned in your ballot yet? And then you can also do voter engagement. You can empower voters to do their own voter engagement. So instead of having a ballot completion party that's in person, you can have a webinar party with your friends to fill out your ballots together over Zoom. But reliable voter information, good place to check is the Secretary of State's website, and then your local registrar of voters. But there's also the election protection program. So if on election day you're trying to figure out what your right to vote is, check out the election protection program hotline.
Great, thanks for that overview. And we'll share some of these resources in a post-event email. So Mindy, LA County is transitioning to all vote by mail for the first time. And you did some great research around that voter experience. When counties transitioned in 2018 for the first time to the Voters' Choice Act, what are some things that organizations should keep in mind? What are some of the areas that voters struggled with? And if you can share some of those tips that the data already shows for the groups that are with us today.
Sure. Well, first I'll direct folks to our website, ccep.usc.org. .edu. I have 2 sites. They both direct to the same thing. And if you go to our publications, to election policy research, you'll see a number of research reports that we put out around this kind of question around outreach and education under the VCA model. So I think just a couple things I'll mention really quickly. Just understanding first and foremost the monumental effort that it takes, and everybody understands this on the call, so I don't need to tell them this, but the monumental effort that it takes to successfully outreach to folks around the VCA, being a a new model, making sure folks get the entire message, not just part of the message, so that they understand all of their options, that they feel comfortable, not just with the nuts and bolts, but also with why there are these changes, how they can benefit them. We heard in 2018 that there were a lot of folks that were working in the 5 VC counties that adopted then that didn't have all the resources that they need. So I think resources are a big part of this picture. And I think all of us are concerned about what resources will be available at a county level in terms of the elections office, but also to all of you in terms of doing this work. So being really realistic about how you can partner with elections offices, but with each other to have shared messages, to have consistent messaging wherever possible, but at the same time recognizing the uniqueness in certain communities and making messages fit to make sense for those communities. And I think I'll just leave it there because of time, but I would just direct people to some of our research. And thank you Esther, for your participation in all of that too.
Yeah, of course. So I have one kind of last question that's coming in, and Harley, go ahead and read it out, and then we'll
Sure. In-language access is important, but literary levels are also vary widely. Can we get materials in more friendly and not so bureaucratic language?
So I'd love for each of you to take a moment. We all talk about digital organizing, everything going virtual. Language is going to be so important now, how we say things, and we talked a little bit about the messaging. So how do your organizations make sure that the messages that you're using resonate, that the language you're using is simple and can be understood by your target audience? And we can go around. I'll go with Kirk, and then Ellie, Kiana, James, and Brittany to conclude us.
All right. So when we're looking for the messaging that resonates with our community members, usually we do focus groups, and we just, we throw questions at them. We do different just exercises to see what resonates better. How does it sound? How does this make you feel when you hear this? What would you need to hear that would, get you up out of your seat? And from there, we're able to really decide what is the best messaging for, for our senior population, or for our people that are just graduating from high school, or folks that are systemically impacted. We want to make sure that we're speaking directly to them so they can't miss it, and let them know that we see you and that we want you to get activated.
Great. And Ellie, a quick response. We're almost running out of time.
Sure. No, I would just say that I totally agree. I think the in-language information has to be culturally relevant, right? Because I think there's a difference between a Spanish that is very academic versus a Spanish that is widely spoken in the community, right? So for us is, in the absence of, let's say, the county understanding that, our outreach and organizers understand it, right? So I think when we have to use that material, we have to supplement that with our outreach and messaging strategies that would be more culturally relevant and reaching the populations that we actually want to reach.
Great, thank you. And Kiana?
Yeah, I think what's going to be really important over the next few weeks and months is, coming together and deciding what the most critical universal messages are for our communities, and also making sure that they translate nicely into the many language communities that LA County has. And I think also, in response to the question, the LA County Registrar's Office has been really great about creating videos and translating them. They had YouTube videos explaining the changes with VSAP before this last election. So I think, using multimedia and sharing these videos, they'll also be a great resource in educating voters ahead of November.
Great, thank you. And James, and then Brittany, and then Mindy, I have one last question for you before we conclude this panel.
Yeah, just really quickly, I just wanted to make the point that, we don't always, sort of disregard the government materials, right? That, kind of word to what Ellie and Kirk said, like we still want to use those culturally relevant materials that we develop on our own. But a lot of times the government materials can be kind of useful to give like basic information. And so we'll want to use that to supplement what we create so that we can, direct folks to, the vote centers, for instance, right? Like if there's a list that's already created, why recreate the wheel? We can, again, hand them our sort of flyer, but also hand them that list and keep it moving. And we don't have to necessarily spend money to recreate that. So wanted to make that point as well.
Yeah, great, thank you. And Brittany, ACLU bridges legalese and speaking to voters. So tips for making language accessible for folks.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of hearing from as many stakeholders as possible. As everybody's already touched on, we rely a lot on research from amazing researchers like Mindy to make sure that we are meeting people where they're at. I think that's incredibly important, that you respond to how people want to vote and how they're able to vote, and how they feel about government and the mail, and all of those things are really important. And it's also important that we partner with other organizations who have more direct connections to the community. And then we have a great communications department as well, which always helps.
Yeah. Great. Thank you to all of our panelists. I just wanted to take a moment to first just acknowledge the partnership we've had with the California Civic Engagement Project and USC on this event. And Mindy, I wanted to cue up this because we've heard the importance of messaging and how we say and what we're going to say. So I wanted to give you a chance, if you could, to share about your upcoming research project that we're going to be working on with you. And I think it's important for folks to know that this research will be coming.
Yeah, thanks, Astrid. And since I'm closing it out here, I just want to also thank all the panelists, everybody that participated and joined us today, and thank you for your partnership and your staff, Katie and Lupe were fantastic to work with on all this. So we're doing a number of research projects and surveys trying to get at different kind of components of this puzzle for November. And one is something we're really excited about. It's a partnership with the Future of California Elections. We're doing a survey focused on messaging, trying to better understand what messages might work and in what ways, particularly for underrepresented groups. And it'll be a large enough survey also to drill down in on LA and the differences that we may see in LA. So I think I'll leave it there.
Yeah, great. So I want to thank everybody. My colleague Lupe is going to come back on in a minute. You've heard about our Voters Choice LA network. We want to stay connected, so he's going to share a bit about how to do that. I just want to conclude by saying thank you to our expert panelists here for sharing with us. We've heard the importance of trusted messengers, of having messages that are relevant and that resonate with voters, and the importance of partnerships. So please join us and connect with us on our work. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Lupe. And thank you, everybody, to our panelists and to everybody that participated today, and of course to my team. So Lupe, go ahead and bring us home.
It was a great webinar. And again, thanks to everyone who participated, who helped, especially some of the unsung heroes behind the scenes, Katie Flaherty and Harley Ham, for jumping in and helping with us. There is a link to a survey to evaluate this webinar. It is in chat. We'll also be receiving it via email. By responding to it, you help us understand how we did with this webinar and how we can improve in future webinars. Upcoming events have been already mentioned. You can definitely connect with us, VCLA, on the screen, via social media, by subscribing to a newsletter, looking for resources and website, or just emailing us directly. The California Civic Engagement Project information is there as well, along with Mindy's Twitter handle. We all try to stay active on social media. I think we do a pretty good job. We also want to thank our funders, the Democracy Fund and the James Irvine Foundation. A special thanks for all our presenters, and especially to Dean Logan and the LA County staff for not only helping with this, for being just excellent partners all year round. The VCLA Steering Committee, certainly, and final thanks to Mindy and USC for the partnership and co-hosting this event. We're very appreciative. We're looking forward to networking and working with all of you in the future to make this next November election safe and accessible for everyone. Thanks again, everybody. Have a good weekend.